The Great Hall of the Galactic Council buzzed with excitement. Hundreds of alien beings from across the galaxy filled the curved seats that rose like steps around the central speaking platform. Their voices mixed together in a sound like rushing water as they talked among themselves. Today was a special day. Today, they were finally free. Ambassador Zethkri stepped up to the speaking platform. His blue skin gleamed under the bright lights, and his forearms moved in gestures of triumph. The tall Altarian looked out at the crowd with his large black eyes and smiled. Behind him, a massive screen showed the last human ships disappearing into the darkness of space. "My fellow beings," Zethkri said, his voice carrying clearly through the hall. "Today marks the beginning of a new age for our galaxy. After years of conflict and trouble, the humans have finally left our space. They chose to go on their own. And we are better for it." The crowd erupted in cheers. Beings with scales, fur, and skin of every color clapped, chirped, and made sounds of joy. Some had tentacles that waved in the air. Others had wings that fluttered with excitement. All of them seemed happy that the humans were gone. Chairman Vexara stood up from his high seat at the center of the hall. The ancient being moved slowly, his silver robes flowing around his thin frame. His species had ruled the council for 1,000 years, and his word was law. When he raised one wrinkled hand, the hall became quiet. "The vote is official," Vexara announced. "Humanity's exile from this galaxy is complete. They will not return. Our galaxy is now at peace." More cheers filled the hall. But far from this celebration, in the cold darkness between stars, a different story was playing out. Commander Jake Murphy stood on the bridge of the cargo ship New Hope. Through the wide windows, he could see hundreds of other ships stretching out in all directions. Some were huge transport vessels that had once carried goods between planets. Others were smaller ships that families had bought or built to escape. All of them were packed with humans heading for a new home. Jake was tired. He had spent the last 6 months helping to organize the Great Departure. 12 billion people was a lot to move, even with all the ships they could find. Every day had brought new problems to solve and new fears to calm. "Sir," said Lieutenant Amy Foster from her station, "Dr. Grant wants to speak with you." Jake nodded and walked to the communication area. Dr. Lisa Grant's face appeared on the screen. She looked as tired as Jake felt, but her eyes were still sharp and determined. She had been the head of human galactic relations for 10 years before. Everything fell apart. "Jake," she said, "how are the civilian ships doing?" "Better than expected," Jake replied. "A few minor problems with life support on the older vessels, but nothing we can't handle. Captain Bell says we should reach the Andromeda Galaxy in 18 months. Dr. Grant nodded. "Good. I wanted to let you know that I'm sending our final message to the Council today. I think they should hear what we have to say before we go too far." Jake understood. For years, humans had tried to explain themselves to the other species in the galaxy. They had tried to show that they weren't the violent monsters everyone thought they were. But it never worked. Every time there was a fight or a war, people blamed the humans. Every time someone got hurt, it was humanity's fault. The truth was more complicated. Humans did fight more than other species. They did have more weapons and stronger armies, but there was a reason for that, even if humans themselves didn't fully understand it. They felt driven to explore dangerous places and fight dangerous enemies. Other species called this violence and aggression. Humans called it protecting people. Dr. Grant's message was simple but important. She had recorded it in the main communications center of her ship, with the stars of their old galaxy visible through the window behind her. "To the members of the Galactic Council," she began, "we want you to know that we are not leaving because we are angry or because we want revenge. We are leaving because we are tired of being blamed for things we cannot control. We are tired of being seen as monsters when we try to help." She paused and looked directly into the camera. "You think you will be safer without us. You think peace will come now that the violent humans are gone. We hope you are right. But if you are wrong, if problems come that you cannot handle, remember this message. Remember that we tried to warn you about the things that live in the dark places between stars. Remember that we tried to protect you, even when you hated us for it. The message was sent across the galaxy, reaching every council member and every major government. Most of them deleted it without listening. Those who did listen laughed or got angry. Humans always thought they were so important, they said. Humans always believed they were the heroes of every story. But some people listened carefully. Some remembered the strange reports that came from the edges of known space, reports of ships that disappeared without warning, reports of signals from empty space, reports of things that didn't make sense. Captain Ryan Bell commanded the largest ship in the human fleet. The Exodus had been built by connecting 12 cargo ships together and covering them with metal plates and shields. It wasn't beautiful, but it could carry 2 million people and keep them safe during the long journey. Ryan had been a military captain before the Exodus. He had fought in 3 wars and commanded ships in battles across the galaxy. He knew about the strange things that lived in dark space because he had fought them. Most humans who served in the military had fought them at some point, but they rarely talked about it. The battles were too weird, too frightening, and too hard to explain. The alien species of the galaxy lived close to their home stars. They built their cities on safe planets and traveled on well-known space routes. They had good shields and strong laws and peaceful lives. They thought this was normal. They thought this was how all intelligent life should live. Humans were different. They went to places where others wouldn't go. They explored dead systems and empty regions. They built bases in dangerous locations and sent patrols to monitor threats that most species couldn't even see. They thought this was normal. They thought this was what you had to do to stay safe. As the human fleet moved further from their old galaxy, Jake Murphy sent a final report to Earth's government archives. The message would take years to reach its destination, but someone needed to record what had happened. "The Exodus is proceeding as planned," he wrote. 12 billion humans are leaving the Milky Way galaxy for a new home in Andromeda. We are taking our ships, our knowledge, our weapons, and our warriors with us. The Galactic Council believes they will be safer without us. We hope they are right, but we fear they are wrong. The things we fought in the dark places between stars are still there. The threats we watched for are still real. Without human patrols and human bases, without human weapons and human soldiers, these threats may grow beyond control. We tried to warn them, but they would not listen. Now they will have to learn for themselves what we have always known, that safety must be earned through strength and peace must be protected by those willing to fight for it." The message ended, and Jake returned to his duties. There were people to feed, ships to repair, and a long journey ahead. Behind them, the Milky Way galaxy grew smaller and dimmer each day. Ahead of them, new stars waited in the darkness. In the Galactic Council chambers, the celebration continued. Representatives gave speeches about the bright future ahead. They talked about the peace and prosperity that would come now that humanity was gone. They made plans for a galaxy without war, without conflict, without fear. None of them noticed the small, strange signals that were beginning to appear on the edge of their sensor networks. None of them saw the shadows that were starting to move in the empty space between stars. None of them heard the whispers that were growing louder in the darkness. They would notice soon enough. They would learn what the humans had always known. But by then, it might be too late. 3 months had passed since the human fleet disappeared into the darkness between galaxies. The Galactic Council had settled into their new routine of peace and prosperity. Trade routes were busier than ever. New colonies were being built on distant worlds. Everything seemed perfect. Then the reports started coming in. Security Chief Talvek sat in his office on the Altarian homeworld, reading the latest intelligence reports. His four hands moved quickly across multiple screens as he tried to make sense of what he was seeing. The blue-skinned officer had been tracking security threats for 20 years, but these new reports were different from anything he had seen before. The first incident had happened near the Outer Rim territories. A Kethmori raiding party had attacked a mining station in the Vega system. This wasn't unusual by itself. The Kethmori were known for small raids and piracy. What was unusual was how they fought. "Computer, show me the battle recordings from Vega Station," Talvek said, the main screen filled with grainy video from the station's security cameras. Talvek watched as Kethmori fighters swooped down on the mining platform. But instead of the chaotic, disorganized attacks they were known for, these fighters moved in perfect formation. They targeted specific systems with surgical precision. They used tactics that military academies taught to advanced students. The Kethmori had always been violent, but they had never been smart about it. They were raiders and pirates who relied on surprise and brutality. They didn't plan complex battles or use sophisticated weapons. Yet here they were, fighting like a real military force. "Computer, show me the Kethmori prisoner interviews." The screen changed to show a holding cell where a captured Kethmori warrior sat chained to a chair. The creature looked like a cross between a lizard and an insect, with sharp claws and multiple eyes. When the interrogator asked about the attack, the warrior's response made Talvek's blood run cold. "The ancient voices call to us," the warrior hissed. "They sing of the time before the Guardians. They promise power to those who serve. The Guardians have fled, and now the feast begins." Talvek replayed the recording 3 times. Guardians. What Guardians? The Kethmori had never talked about ancient voices or Guardians before. They barely had a religion, let alone complex mythology about cosmic entities. A soft chime indicated another report was coming in. This one was from the border patrol near the Spiral Arm. 3 council ships had been attacked by what appeared to be ordinary pirates. But these pirates had destroyed 2 military vessels and badly damaged the 3rd before disappearing into deep space. Captain Ben Clark's old tactical reports were still in the military database. The human officer had written extensively about unconventional warfare and how to fight enemies who used unpredictable strategies. Talvek pulled up Clark's files, looking for anything that might explain these new attacks. One report caught his attention. It was titled Threat Assessment Unknown Entities in Deep Space. The file was marked as classified, but Talvek's security clearance let him read it. During patrol missions in Sector 15, Clark had written, "Human vessels have encountered evidence of hostile activity in areas previously thought to be uninhabited. Strange energy readings, disrupted communications, and the discovery of ships that appear to have been attacked by unknown weapons suggest that dangerous entities may be active in the empty regions between star systems." Clark's report went on to describe a pattern of disappearances and attacks that human forces had been quietly investigating for decades. Ships that vanished without distress calls, colonies that went silent overnight. Strange signals from empty space that seemed to follow no known pattern. The humans had been tracking these threats, Clark wrote, but they had never been able to prove what was causing them. The evidence was always incomplete, the witnesses were unreliable, and the attacks seemed random. But Clark believed there was a connection between all these incidents. The enemy, whatever it is, appears to avoid direct confrontation with prepared forces, the report concluded. Human military presence in these regions may be serving as a deterrent to larger-scale hostile activities. Talvek felt a chill run down his spine. If Clark was right, then human patrols had been protecting the galaxy from threats that most species didn't even know existed. Now that the humans were gone, were these threats becoming more active? Another alert flashed on his screen. This one was from Dr. Nina Parks, a human scientist who had studied alien biology for the Council before the Exodus. Her research had been stored in the archives when she left, but someone had just accessed her files. Talvek opened Dr. Parks's research folder and found dozens of reports about strange organisms found in deep space. Most of the files were heavily redacted, with entire sections marked as classification pending or insufficient data. But what remained was disturbing enough. Dr. Parks had studied creatures that seemed to exist partially outside normal space. She had found evidence of intelligence that operated according to completely alien principles. Her notes mentioned dormant, phases, and activation triggers, and environmental factors that influence hostile behavior. One partially deleted file caught Talvek's attention. It was titled Natural Deterrent Factors in Void Entity Behavior. Most of the content had been removed, but a few lines remained. Electromagnetic patterns consistent with human neural activity appear to cause avoidance responses in observed specimens. Further research needed to determine if this effect is intentional or coincidental. Recommend maintaining human presence in affected regions until the rest of the file was gone. Talvek leaned back in his chair, trying to process what he was reading. Dr. Parks seemed to be suggesting that human brain patterns somehow repelled dangerous creatures that lived in empty space. It sounded impossible, but it would explain why these creatures had remained hidden while humans were patrolling the galaxy. His computer chimed with an urgent priority message. Admiral Kyle Stone's face appeared on the screen, broadcasting from somewhere in the void between galaxies. The human officer looked tired and concerned. "This is Admiral Stone, speaking from the Exodus Fleet," the message began. "We are monitoring long-range communications from our former galaxy, and we are seeing reports that concern us greatly. Increased hostile activity in sectors that were previously under human patrol suggests that our departure may have had unintended consequences." Stone paused, looking directly into the camera. "I want to be clear about something. Humans were not patrolling those regions because we wanted to control territory or because we were looking for resources. We were there because something else was there first, something that most species cannot detect and that poses a threat to all intelligent life." The Admiral's expression grew more serious. "Our scientists are analyzing the situation, but we are now several months away from the galaxy and cannot provide immediate assistance. We recommend that Council forces increase patrols in the regions marked in the attached files. Be especially careful near areas with high dark matter concentrations and avoid investigating signals that do not match known communication patterns." The message ended with a data packet containing coordinates for dozens of star systems. Talvek opened the file and saw that every system on the list was a place where humans had maintained military bases or regular patrols. Many of them were areas that other species considered worthless, empty regions with no planets worth colonizing, and no resources worth mining. But if Admiral Stone was right, these regions weren't empty at all. They were occupied by something that humans had been quietly fighting for decades. Talvek forwarded the information to his superiors and requested permission to increase security in the specified regions. But he suspected it was already too late. If hostile entities had been waiting for human forces to leave, they would have already started moving. Another report appeared on his screen. This one was from a deep space monitoring station near the galactic edge. The automated sensors had detected massive energy signatures moving through dark space. The signatures were too large to be ships and too organized to be natural phenomena. Whatever was out there was heading toward inhabited systems, and there were no human patrols left to stop it. Talvek opened a communication channel to Council headquarters and began typing his report. He chose his words carefully, knowing that most Council members would not want to hear what he had to say. Recent intelligence suggests that human military activities may have been serving functions beyond what was previously understood, he wrote. Recommend immediate investigation of threats in formerly human-patrolled regions and consideration of emergency protocols for unknown hostile entities. He sent the report and sat back to wait for a response. Outside his window, the stars looked the same as always. But Talvek now knew that the darkness between them was not empty. Something was moving out there, something that had been waiting patiently for the Guardians to leave. The galaxy was about to learn what the humans had been protecting them from all along. 6 months after humanity's departure, the galaxy was no longer celebrating. What had started as isolated incidents had grown into a crisis that threatened every civilized world. The Galactic Council chambers, once filled with joy at humanity's exile, now buzzed with fear and confusion. Chairman Vexara looked older than his 1,000 years as he reviewed the latest damage reports. 17 star systems had gone completely dark in the past month. Not destroyed, not conquered, simply gone. Their stars still burned, their planets still orbited, but every living thing on them had vanished without a trace. "Show me the Kepler." "System recordings again," he commanded. The massive display screen filled with images from the last automated probe to visit Kepler Prime. The planet's surface was covered in a strange, dark substance that seemed to absorb light. Where once a thriving colony of 2 million beings had lived, now there was only empty silence and that terrible black coating that made the instruments malfunction. Dr. Carl Thompson's archived research files lay open on Vexara's desk. The human historian had written extensively about patterns in galactic history that other scholars had dismissed as coincidence. His work was suddenly becoming very relevant. Every 347 years, Thompson had written, there are reports of unusual disappearances and unexplained phenomena in the outer regions of inhabited space. These cycles appear to correspond with certain astronomical events, particularly the alignment of dark matter flows between galaxy clusters. Thompson's research suggested that something had been happening in regular cycles for thousands of years. But each time, the incidents would suddenly stop, and the galaxy would return to normal. Other historians assumed this was just the natural ebb and flow of cosmic events. Thompson believed something was actively stopping these cycles from completing. Ambassador Zeth Kree stood at the center of the council chamber, his blue skin pale with exhaustion. The Altarian who had once celebrated humanity's departure now found himself begging for solutions that might never come. "The void entities have consumed the Rigel system," he announced to the assembled representatives. "Our long-range sensors show massive dark matter concentrations moving toward the core worlds. Military estimates suggest we have perhaps 3 months before they reach the inner colonies." The term void entities had been coined by the few scientists who survived close encounters with whatever was destroying inhabited worlds. The creatures appeared to be made of dark matter, existing partially outside normal space. They consumed entire ecosystems, converting matter into dark energy and leaving behind only empty husks of planets. General Sam Rodriguez's emergency transmission from the Andromeda Galaxy had arrived 2 weeks earlier. The human AI specialist had analyzed the Council's data and reached a terrifying conclusion. "You're not dealing with an invasion," Rodriguez had said in his recorded message. "You're dealing with a harvest. These entities follow a predictable pattern. They emerge from dark space when certain conditions are met, feed on inhabited worlds until they reach a specific energy threshold, then return to dormancy for several centuries." Rodriguez's analysis showed that the cycle should have been interrupted decades ago. Something had been preventing the void entities from completing their feeding pattern, forcing them to remain in the dark spaces between stars. Now that the interference was gone, they were making up for lost time. The pattern suggests that an active deterrent force has been operating for approximately 200 years, Rodriguez continued. "Based on the timing and the regions involved, we believe human military activities were inadvertently disrupting the entity's emergence cycles. Our patrols in deep space, our weapons testing in dark matter regions, our electromagnetic signatures, all of these may have been keeping the entities dormant. The human fleet had been monitoring the crisis from Andromeda, but they were too far away to help immediately. Their message ended with coordinates for human weapons caches hidden throughout the galaxy and technical specifications for devices that might slow the entity's advance. But the Council's military forces were struggling to understand the human technology. Their energy-based weapons had no effect on creatures made of dark matter. Their defensive strategies, based on centuries of conventional warfare, were useless against enemies that could phase in and out of normal space. Tech specialist Amy Foster's engineering logs provided some answers. The human engineer had designed weapons specifically for fighting what she called non-standard entities. Her notes described kinetic weapons, nuclear charges, and exotic matter projectors that could damage beings existing outside normal physics. Energy weapons pass through them like light through glass, Foster had written. But kinetic impacts in the right dimensional frequency can disrupt their cohesion. Nuclear explosions create temporary reality distortions that force them back into normal space where conventional weapons can affect them. The problem was that most Council species had abandoned kinetic weapons centuries ago. They considered them primitive and inefficient compared to energy beams and plasma cannons. Only humans had continued developing projectile weapons and nuclear technologies that other species saw as barbaric relics of a violent past. Fleet Admiral Tony Mitchell's distant transmission from the Exodus fleet had been even more disturbing. The human commander revealed that the entities weren't acting alone. "The Kethmori corruption is spreading," Mitchell reported. "Our intelligence indicates that the entities can influence biological minds through exposure to dark matter radiation. The corruption is subtle at first. Increased aggression, improved tactical thinking, enhanced loyalty to the entity collective. Over time, the affected beings become completely subservient to the entity will." This explained the Kethmori's sudden military sophistication. They weren't just raiders anymore. They were servants of cosmic predators, enhanced by alien influence, and directed by intelligence far beyond their natural capabilities. Worse, the corruption was spreading to other species as the entity's influence grew stronger. Several Council military units had reported strange behavior among their troops after encounters with Kethmori forces. Soldiers who had been exposed to the enemy's weapons showed increased aggression and sometimes spoke about ancient voices calling to them in their sleep. The Council's best xenobiologists were studying samples of the dark matter coating found on consumed worlds. What they discovered challenged everything they thought they knew about life and death. The substance wasn't just destroying organic matter, it was converting it into something else, something that existed partially outside the normal universe. Dr. Nina Parks's research files contained warnings about this exact scenario. The human scientist had theorized that the entities weren't just consuming worlds for energy. They were incorporating them into some kind of vast interdimensional network. Each harvested world became part of a larger intelligence that grew stronger with every conquest. The ultimate goal appears to be the conversion of all matter in the galaxy into dark matter substrate, Parks had written. This would allow the entity collective to exist fully in normal space while maintaining their ability to phase between dimensions. In essence, they would transform our entire galaxy into their physical body. The implications were staggering. If Parks was right, the eight void entities weren't just invading the galaxy, they were trying to become the galaxy. Every star, every planet, every living being would be absorbed into a cosmic intelligence beyond human comprehension. Chairman Vexara closed the human research files and looked out at the Council representatives. Many of them were species that had never fought a real war. They had lived peaceful lives in the safety that human military strength had unknowingly provided. Now, they faced an enemy that made their worst nightmares seem pleasant. "We need to acknowledge what our human colleagues were trying to tell us," Vexara said quietly. "They weren't just aggressive warriors looking for fights. They were guardians, standing watch against threats we couldn't see. Their violent nature was evolution's response to dangers that most of us never knew existed. The chamber fell silent. Some representatives looked ashamed, remembering how they had cheered when the humans left. Others looked terrified, finally understanding what their galaxy was facing without its protectors. Security Chief Talvek stood up from his seat in the observer section. "Mr. Chairman, I've been reviewing human patrol routes and base locations. From the past 50 years, every single outpost they established was in a region where we're now seeing entity activity. They weren't expanding randomly. They were creating a defensive perimeter around inhabited space." The revelation hit the Council like a physical blow. Humans hadn't been conquering territory or seeking resources. They had been building a network of monitoring stations and weapons platforms to guard against threats that operated beyond normal perception. Their illegal militarization of space had actually been a shield protecting the entire galaxy. But that shield was gone now. The human bases had been dismantled, their weapons removed, their personnel evacuated. The galaxy stood naked before enemies that most species couldn't even see, let alone fight. As if summoned by their despair, another priority alert flashed on the chamber's screens. The Centauri system, home to over 1 billion beings. 8 months after the human exodus, the Galactic Council was fighting for its very existence. The sprawling chamber that had once hosted debates about trade agreements and diplomatic protocols now served as a war room. Emergency lighting cast harsh shadows on the faces of the few remaining representatives who had managed to escape the spreading darkness. Chairman Vexara studied the tactical display with growing despair. Red markers showed the locations of consumed worlds, spreading like an infection across the galaxy map. 17 civilizations had been completely harvested. The core worlds, the oldest and most populated systems in the galaxy, were now under direct threat. "Status report," Vexara commanded, his voice hoarse from days of constant meetings. Admiral Kethron, the Council's highest-ranking military officer, stepped forward. The 8-foot-tall warrior's carapace was cracked from a recent battle, and his compound eyes showed the strain of fighting an enemy he couldn't understand. "We've lost contact with the Vegan Defense Fleet," Kethran reported. 12 star destroyers and 40 escort vessels, gone without a trace. Our strongest defensive line lasted less than 6 hours against the entities. The numbers were staggering. The Council military had been built to maintain peace between civilized species, not to fight cosmic horrors that existed outside normal space. Their ships were designed for show as much as combat, with beautiful lines and gleaming hulls that meant nothing against enemies made of dark matter. Dr. Eric Williams appeared on the main communication screen, his image crackling with interference. From the vast distance between galaxies, the human physicist looked exhausted, his hair gray and his eyes red from months of constant work. "Council Chairman," Williams said, "we've received your request for assistance. I want to be completely honest with you about our situation." Williams gestured to something off-screen, and the image expanded to show the human fleet in Andromeda. Hundreds of ships hung in space around massive construction platforms. Even from this distance, it was clear that the humans were building something unprecedented. "We've been monitoring your crisis since it began," Williams continued. "Our long-range sensors show the entity spread pattern, and we've been analyzing their behavior based on Dr. Park's research and our own combat experience. The good news is that we understand what you're fighting. The bad news is that you don't have the tools to fight it." The physicist brought up a holographic display showing the galaxy. Dark areas spread across the map like a cancer, with bright spots marking the remaining safe zones. The entities operate in a feeding cycle that should have peaked decades ago, Williams explained. Human military activities were disrupting their emergence pattern, keeping them dormant in dark space. Now they're making up for lost time, accelerating their harvest to reach the energy levels they need for their next evolutionary phase. Chairman Vexara leaned forward. "What evolutionary phase?" Williams' expression grew grim. "Complete dimensional integration," Once they absorb enough matter and energy, they'll be able to exist fully in normal space while retaining their ability to phase between dimensions. At that point, they'll be unstoppable. The entire galaxy will become their physical body. The revelation sent murmurs of terror through the chamber. Some representatives began praying to their various gods. Others simply stared at the display in shock. "How long do we have?" Vexara asked. "Based on their current consumption rate, perhaps 3 months before they reach the critical threshold," Williams replied. "However, there is some hope. We've been developing countermeasures based on the weapons caches Commander Turner left behind and the technical specifications from Lieutenant Morris's combat files." The human fleet had been busy during their months in exile. Using the time and resources of an entire civilization, they had built ships and weapons specifically designed to fight enemies that existed outside normal physics. But even traveling at maximum speed, they were still months away from the Milky Way. "We're coming back," Williams announced. "Every ship that can make the journey is already en route. But we need you to hold the core worlds until we arrive. We're transmitting coordinates for hidden weapons caches and technical data for building defensive systems that can slow the entity's advance." The transmission ended, leaving the Council to contemplate their desperate situation. They had perhaps 3 months to learn how to fight an enemy that had been evolving for millions of years, using weapons technology they barely understood. Security Chief Talvek had spent weeks studying the human weapons caches scattered throughout the galaxy. What he found challenged everything he thought he knew about human civilization. They weren't just hiding weapons, he reported to the emergency committee. They were maintaining an entire shadow military infrastructure. Bases inside asteroids, weapons platforms disguised as mining equipment, sensor networks hidden in seemingly empty space. The scope of the human defensive network was staggering. For over 2 centuries, they had been quietly building fortifications against threats that other species couldn't perceive. Their aggressive expansion had actually been the construction of a galaxy-wide early warning system. Commander Alex Turner's tactical files provided blueprints for weapons that seemed to bend the laws of physics. Reality anchors that could force dark matter entities into normal space. Quantum disruptors that could damage beings existing across multiple dimensions. Kinetic weapons that fired projectiles through folded space to hit targets that weren't entirely there. The problem was building them. Human technology was based on principles that other species had never explored. While the galaxy had focused on energy manipulation and gravitational control, humans had developed weapons that worked by destabilizing the fundamental structure of space-time itself. "It's like they were preparing for a completely different kind of war," muttered Dr. Zarathek, the Council's chief scientist. The crystalline being's form flickered with confusion as she tried to understand the human technical specifications. "They were," Talvek replied. "They were preparing for this war. They've been fighting it for centuries without even fully understanding what they were fighting. The first breakthrough came when Council engineers managed to activate one of the human weapons caches hidden in the asteroid belt. The facility had been disguised as a mineral processing station, but its true purpose became clear when they accessed the underground chambers, rows of kinetic cannons designed to fire solid projectiles. At near-light speed lined the walls. Nuclear warheads with exotic matter cores sat in armored storage units. Most impressive were the reality anchors, devices that could create stable zones of normal space-time that entities couldn't phase through. Lieutenant Kate Morris's pilot, records provided the tactical knowledge needed to use these weapons effectively. Her combat footage showed human fighters engaging void entities in battles that looked more like physics experiments than traditional warfare. "Target the dimensional weak points," Morris had noted in her combat manual. "The entities exist partially outside our space, but they need anchor points in normal reality to interact with matter. Disrupt those anchor points, and they become vulnerable to conventional weapons." The Council's first successful engagement with a void entity occurred near the Jupiter system. a small fleet using hastily installed human weapons managed to destroy one of the smaller entities, learning valuable lessons about their enemy's capabilities and weaknesses. But for every small victory, there were larger defeats. The entities were learning too, adapting their tactics and growing stronger with each world they consumed. The corrupted Keth Mori had evolved into something barely recognizable, their original reptilian forms twisted by dark matter influence, into creatures of living shadow. Worse, the corruption was spreading to other species. Beings exposed to entity influence showed the same symptoms: increased aggression, enhanced intelligence, and absolute loyalty to the entity collective. Some council worlds had fallen not to direct attack, but to internal uprising as corrupted. Populations turned against their own people. Admiral Nick Chen's reconnaissance reports from deep space painted an even darker picture. The human officer had been monitoring entity movements from a cloaked observation post, and what he found challenged every assumption about their enemy's nature. "They're not just consuming worlds randomly," Chen reported. "There's a pattern to their selection. They're targeting worlds with specific genetic diversity, particular mineral compositions, and unique energy signatures. They're not just feeding. They're collecting ingredients for something." Chen's analysis suggested that the entities were building towards some kind of massive construction project. Each harvested world provided specific materials or energy types needed for their final goal. If he was right, stopping them wasn't just about saving the remaining population, it was about preventing something far worse. As the core worlds prepared their defenses using human technology, Chairman Vexara faced the hardest decision of his long life. The emergency session had been called to vote on humanity's status in the galaxy. "We drove them away," he said to the assembled representatives. "We called them violent and aggressive. We blamed them for every conflict and treated them like criminals. But they were protecting us from threats." 12 months after humanity's exile, the galaxy stood on the edge of total extinction. Only the core worlds remained, protected by failing energy shields and desperate defensive lines. The void entities had consumed everything else, transforming nearly half the galaxy into dark matter substrate for their incomprehensible purposes. Chairman Vexara stood in the emergency command center deep beneath the council chambers. The ancient being had not slept in days, sustained only by stimulants and the desperate hope that somehow someone would find a way to stop the approaching darkness. The tactical display showed the final entity assault forming in the outer system. Massive dark matter concentrations, each one larger than a moon, moved in perfect formation toward the last bastions of civilization. Corrupted Keth Mori ships, twisted into shapes that hurt to look at, swarmed around their masters like loyal servants. "All defensive stations report ready," Admiral Kethran announced, though his voice carried no confidence. They had perhaps 6 hours before the entities reached the inner planets. The human weapons had slowed the advance, but everyone knew it. "Wasn't enough, sir," called out sensor operator Lindar from her station. "I'm detecting massive energy signatures at the galactic edge, multiple contacts heading this way at impossible speeds." Vexara turned to the long-range display, hardly daring to hope. For a moment, the readings made no sense. The energy signatures were enormous, unlike anything in the Council's databases. Then the computer finished its analysis, and the truth hit him like a physical blow. "Those are human ships," Lindar whispered. "Hundreds of them." The communication board lit up with incoming transmissions. Fleet Admiral Dan Parker's weathered face appeared on the main screen, speaking from the bridge of a vessel that looked nothing like the cargo ships that had carried humanity into exile. "This is Admiral Parker of the Human Defense Fleet," he said. "We're here to finish what we started." Behind Parker, the bridge of his flagship hummed with activity. Officers moved with the precision of a military force that had spent a year preparing for this exact moment. But it was the view through the ship's windows that took Vexara's breath away. The human fleet was a sight to behold. Massive battleships, bristled with weapons that seemed to bend space around them. Smaller vessels darted between the capital ships like schools of deadly fish, and at the center of the formation, a ship so large it had to be assembled in space dominated the fleet. Like a metal moon. Council forces are ordered to withdraw to minimum safe distance, Parker continued. We have work to do. Dr. Kevin Hayes appeared on a secondary screen, broadcasting from what looked like a mobile laboratory. The human scientist was surrounded by equipment that pulsed with energies that made the sensors scream warnings. We've spent the last year analyzing void entity behavior and developing countermeasures, Hayes explained. The entities exist across multiple dimensions simultaneously, which is why conventional weapons can't touch them, but we've learned to fight fire with fire. The human ships began to spread out, taking positions around the solar system with mathematical precision. As they moved, space itself seemed to respond to their presence. Reality anchors activated, creating zones of stable space-time that forced the entities to manifest more fully in normal dimensions. Colonel Beth Moore's voice cut through the communications chatter as she coordinated the assault teams. All units, remember your training. These things feed on chaos and fear. Stay calm, stay focused, and trust your equipment. The final battle began not with explosions or energy beams, but with a subtle shift in the nature of space itself. The human ships fired weapons that existed partially outside normal physics, creating tiers in reality that pulled the void entities into vulnerable configurations. Captain Tim Brooks commanded one of the assault squadrons, leading his fighters, in attack patterns that looked more like complex mathematical equations than traditional combat maneuvers. His ships fired kinetic rounds that traveled through folded space, hitting targets that existed in multiple dimensions simultaneously. Target the convergence points, Brooks ordered his pilots. Force them to choose which dimension they want to exist in, then hit them with everything we've got. The entities fought back with weapons of pure dark matter, creating zones of twisted space-time that would have destroyed any normal vessel. But the human ships had been built specifically for this kind of warfare. Their hulls were lined with exotic matter that could exist in multiple dimensions, and their crews had trained for a year to fight battles that challenged the very laws of physics. The space around the core worlds became a cosmic battlefield where the rules of reality itself were weapons. Human ships phased in and out of normal space, appearing behind entities to deliver devastating attacks before vanishing again. Quantum disruptors tore holes in the fabric of space-time, forcing the ancient predators to face opponents who could match their own impossible abilities. But it was the largest human ship that turned the tide of battle, the massive vessel, designated as a reality fortress, began to emit a field that stabilized space-time across the entire solar system. The entities found themselves trapped in normal space, unable to phase away from the human assault. All units, concentrate fire on the primary convergence, Admiral Parker commanded. We end this now. The combined firepower of the human fleet, focused on the largest entity, a creature of dark matter so vast it could have swallowed planets. Nuclear weapons with exotic matter cores detonated inside its dimensional matrix, while kinetic rounds fired at near-light speed tore through its structure like bullets through smoke. For a moment, the ancient predator wavered between dimensions, its form becoming uncertain and unstable. Then, with a sound like reality tearing, it collapsed into normal space and died. The death of the primary entity sent shock waves through the entire collective. Smaller entities throughout the galaxy suddenly lost cohesion, their dark matter forms, dissolving back into the void. The corrupted Kethmori ships went silent as their master's influence disappeared, leaving confused and frightened crews to wonder what had happened to them. In the aftermath of the battle, Dr. Hayes addressed the Galactic Council from his laboratory ship. Around him, screens showed readings that most species couldn't even comprehend. The threat isn't gone, he explained. It's dormant again, pushed back into the spaces between dimensions where it came from. But it will return eventually. It always does. Hayes brought up a holographic display showing the galaxy's structure. Hidden within the normal matter were traces of the entity network, dormant but not destroyed. The entities are part of the galaxy's natural cycle, he continued. They emerge every few centuries to harvest energy and matter, then return to dormancy. Most civilizations never survive long enough to see the pattern. But humans evolved differently. The human scientist paused, choosing his words carefully. Our species developed in an environment where these entities were more active. Our violent nature was actually an evolutionary response to cosmic predators. We learned to fight things that most species can't even perceive. Chairman Vexara spoke from the council chambers, his voice carrying across the communication link. What happens now? Do you return to exile? Do you stay and protect us? Admiral. Parker's response was simple and direct. We never wanted to be the galaxy's guardians. We just wanted to be left alone to do what we had to do. But someone has to watch for the next emergence. Someone has to be ready when they come back. The human fleet began to disperse, taking up positions throughout the galaxy, but they didn't return to their old bases or reclaim their former territory. Instead, they established new monitoring stations in the deep void, places where they could watch and wait without interfering in the daily lives of other species. Captain Brooks filed his final battle report from a small outpost near the Galactic Rim. The station was barely visible from a distance, designed to blend into the cosmic background radiation. But its sensors reached deep into the spaces between stars, watching for signs of the ancient enemy's return. Sector 7 patrol complete, Brooks reported. No signs of entity activity. Dark matter readings within normal parameters. All systems functioning normally. It was a routine report, the kind that would be filed thousands of times over the coming years. Most people would never read it or understand its importance, but it represented something vital. Proof that someone was standing watch in the darkness. The galaxy returned to its normal routines. Trade resumed, colonies were rebuilt, and new civilizations arose on worlds that had been spared from the harvest. Most beings lived their entire lives without knowing how close they had come to extinction or understanding who had saved them. But in the deep void, human ships continued their eternal patrol. They watched and waited, generation after generation, protecting a galaxy that would never fully understand what it needed protection from. They had learned the hardest lesson of all, that peace was not the absence of war, but the presence of guardians willing to stand between civilization and the darkness that surrounded it. The void entities would return someday. They always did. But when they came, they would find humanity waiting for them, as they always had. Some battles never ended, and some guardians never rested. 5 years had passed since the great battle that saved the galaxy from the void entities. The core worlds had been rebuilt, new colonies flourished on the edges of known space, and trade routes hummed with activity. But everything was different now. The galaxy had learned what lurked in the darkness between stars, and they could never go back to the innocent days when they thought peace was the natural order of things. Chairman Vexara walked through the rebuilt council chambers, his footsteps echoing in the vast hall. The new building was different from the old one. Hidden throughout its structure were sensors that could detect dimensional anomalies and reality anchors that could stabilize space-time if needed. The galaxy's leaders would never again be caught, unprepared. The council itself had changed, too. Where once there had been hundreds of representatives from peaceful civilizations, now there were military advisors and strategic planners. Species that had never fought a real war were learning about combat doctrine and defensive strategies. The age of innocent peace was over. "The morning briefing is ready, sir," said Assistant Karath, a young Altarian who had joined the council. Staff after the war. Like many of her generation, she had grown up knowing about the hidden threats that surrounded them. She wore the knowledge easily, without the fear and confusion that had gripped the older generation. Vexara nodded and entered the situation room. The walls were covered with displays showing human patrol routes, sensor readings from deep space, and status reports from monitoring stations. In the center of the room sat a holographic map of the galaxy, marked with green zones for safe areas and amber zones where human forces maintained constant watch. Admiral Parker appeared on the main communication screen, broadcasting from his flagship somewhere in the outer rim. The human officer looked tired but alert, the way soldiers looked when they knew their watch would never end. "Good morning, Council Chairman," Parker said. "Daily report from the patrol fleet. We've detected minor dimensional fluctuations in Sector 12, but nothing that suggests entity activity. 3 new monitoring stations came online this week, expanding our sensor coverage by another 15 light-years." Vexara studied the tactical display. The human defensive network now covered the entire galaxy, with patrol ships moving in patterns that seemed random but were actually carefully calculated to intercept threats before they could reach inhabited systems. It was the most sophisticated military operation in galactic history, and most civilians had no idea it existed. "Any word from the research teams?" Vexara asked. "Dr. Hayes reports significant progress on the early warning system," Parker replied. "They've managed to create sensors that can detect entity movement up to 6 months before emergence. That should give us plenty of time to position forces and evacuate civilian populations if necessary." The research ship Discovery had been built specifically to study the void entities and develop better ways to fight them. Dr. Kevin Hayes led a team of human and alien scientists who worked together to understand the cosmic predators that had nearly destroyed their galaxy. It was dangerous work, but essential for the galaxy's long-term survival. Captain Tim Brooks had been promoted to Director of Deep Space Operations, coordinating the patrol fleets that watched over the dark regions between stars. His daily reports painted a picture of constant vigilance against threats that most people couldn't imagine. "The entities haven't gone away," Brooks explained during his weekly briefing to Council security chiefs. "They're still out there dormant, but not dead. Our job is to make sure they stay dormant for as long as possible." The human patrol strategy was based on decades of experience fighting interdimensional predators. They maintained a constant presence in regions where entity activity was most likely, using weapons and sensors that could detect threats existing partially outside normal space. It was exhausting work, but it kept the galaxy safe. Lieutenant Amy Foster had become the chief engineer for the human defense fleet. Her job was to maintain the exotic weapons and reality-stabilizing equipment that made it possible to fight enemies from outside normal physics. She worked 18-hour days, training alien technicians and developing new technologies to improve their defensive capabilities. "The hardest part isn't the technology," Foster explained to a group of council engineers. "It's helping people understand that this isn't a problem we can solve once and forget about. The entities are part of the galaxy's natural environment. Fighting them is like fighting gravity or entropy. It's something we'll always have to do." The galaxy's educational systems had been completely restructured to include courses on cosmic threats and dimensional physics. Children who once learned about peaceful exploration now studied the basics of reality manipulation and exotic matter theory. It wasn't the childhood that previous generations had enjoyed, but it was the childhood that would prepare them for the universe they actually lived in. Commander Jake Murphy had established the Galactic Defense Academy on a small planet, near the core worlds. The facility trained volunteers from every species in the techniques needed to fight interdimensional threats. Most of the students were young, members of the generation that had grown up knowing the truth about their galaxy. "We're not trying to turn everyone into soldiers," Murphy explained to visiting council members. "We're teaching them to recognize threats and respond appropriately. Every citizen should know how to activate a reality anchor or operate a quantum disruptor if the situation requires it." The Academy's students came from dozens of different species, each bringing their own unique perspectives to the problem of cosmic defense. What they learned was that fighting the void entities required more than just weapons and tactics. It required a fundamental understanding of the universe's hidden structure. Dr. Lisa Grant had returned from exile to establish the Institute for Dimensional Studies. The former head of Human Galactic Relations now led research into the nature of the spaces between galaxies and the creatures that lived there. Her work was classified at the highest levels, but the results influenced everything from space travel to planetary defense. The entities aren't evil in any sense we understand, Grant explained during a secure briefing to council leaders. They're more like a force of nature, following patterns that have existed for millions of years. Our job isn't to destroy them, it's to coexist with them while protecting ourselves and others. Grant's research had revealed that the void entities were part of a cosmic ecosystem that spanned multiple galaxies. They emerged periodically to harvest energy and matter, then returned to dormancy until the next cycle. Other galaxies had their own versions of these predators, each adapted to local conditions. The knowledge was both terrifying and oddly comforting. Humanity wasn't facing a unique threat. They were dealing with a fundamental aspect of cosmic reality. Every advanced civilization eventually had to learn to defend itself against forces that existed outside normal space-time. Colonel Beth Moore commanded the rapid response teams that could be deployed anywhere in the galaxy within hours. Her forces used ships equipped with experimental drive systems that could travel through folded space, allowing them to reach crisis zones faster than any conventional vessel. Speed is everything when dealing with entity emergence, Moore explained to her officers. By the time most people realize there's a problem, it's already too late for conventional responses. We have to be there first, ready to fight, or entire systems can be lost. Moore's teams trained constantly, running simulations of entity encounters and practicing with weapons that could affect targets existing in multiple dimensions. They were the galaxy's elite forces, the best of the best from dozens of species united by the knowledge that their vigilance was all that stood between civilization and cosmic horror. The public face of the new galactic defense was the Treaty of Eternal Vigilance, signed by every major civilization. The document formally acknowledged humanity's role as guardians and established the legal framework for the defensive network that now protected everyone. We, the civilized species of this galaxy, acknowledge that our safety depends on constant watchfulness against threats that exist beyond normal perception, the treaty began. We pledge our support to those who stand guard in the darkness and our commitment to maintaining the defenses that protect all life. But the most important changes weren't in laws or institutions. They were in the way people thought about their place in the universe. The galaxy had lost its innocence, but it had gained something more valuable: the knowledge that they were not alone and that there were those willing to protect them. Children growing up in this new age would never know the naive confidence that previous generations had enjoyed, but they would also never face the cosmic threats unprepared. They would know that the universe was a dangerous place, but that it was possible to stand against that danger and win. In the deep void between stars, human patrol ships continued their endless watch. Captain Brooks filed his daily reports. Routine. Communications that recorded the state of a galaxy at peace. But it was a peace built on constant vigilance, maintained by guardians who understood that some battles never truly ended. 10 years after the great victory against the void entities, the galaxy had settled into its new reality. The human patrol fleets had become as routine as shipping schedules and weather reports. Children born after the war grew up knowing that invisible guardians watched over them from the darkness between stars. But no system is perfect, and the universe has a way of testing even the best preparations. The first sign of trouble came from the Andromeda Research Station, a joint human-alien facility built near the edge of the galaxy. Dr. Nina Parks had been monitoring deep space phenomena when her sensors detected something that made her blood run cold. The readings looked familiar, but they were coming from the wrong direction entirely. "This can't be right," Parks muttered, checking her instruments for the third time. The energy signatures were definitely void entity markers, but they were appearing in regions that should have been completely clear. Worse, they weren't following the predicted emergence patterns that 10 years of research had established. Parks opened a priority communication channel to the nearest human patrol ship. Commander Steve Miller's weathered face appeared on her screen, broadcasting from the bridge of the scout vessel. Vigilant. "Dr. Parks, what's your situation?" Miller asked, noting the urgency code in her transmission. "Commander, I'm detecting entity signatures in Sector 18, but they're not behaving according to our models," Parks explained. "The readings suggest multiple small entities rather than one large emergence, and they're appearing in regions we classified as low risk." Miller frowned. Over the past decade, the human forces had built their defensive strategy around predicting where and when the entities would emerge. The patterns had seemed consistent, based on dark matter concentrations and dimensional weak points. If the entities were changing their behavior, everything would need to be reconsidered. "I'm dispatching Scout Team Alpha to investigate," Miller said. "Dr. Hayes needs to see this data immediately." Captain Tony Williams led Scout Team Alpha in a modified patrol ship equipped with the latest detection equipment. His crew had been specifically trained to investigate unusual phenomena without triggering hostile responses. As they approached the coordinates Parks had provided, their sensors began picking up readings that defied explanation. "Sir, I'm seeing multiple small dimensional distortions," reported sensor specialist Kate Thompson from her station. "They're moving in patterns that look almost organized." Williams studied the tactical display. Instead of the massive, chaotic emergence they had come to expect from void entities, these readings showed dozens of smaller disturbances spread across a wide area. They seemed to be coordinating their movements like scouts exploring new territory. "All, stop," Williams ordered. "Passive sensors only. Let's watch and learn before we do anything else." For 3 hours, Scout Team Alpha observed the strange phenomena. The small entities moved through space in formations that suggested intelligence and purpose. They investigated asteroids, scanned empty regions, and seemed to be mapping the local area. But they showed no interest in the inhabited worlds that had always been their primary targets. Dr. Kevin Hayes arrived at the Andromeda Research Station within 18 hours, bringing with him a team of specialists and enough equipment to turn the facility into a temporary command center. The human scientist had spent the past decade studying void entity behavior, but these new readings challenged everything he thought he knew. "They're not hunting," Hayes observed as he reviewed the sensor data. "They're exploring. But why? And why now?" The answer came from an unexpected source. Lieutenant Ben Clark, a young officer assigned to deep space monitoring, had been reviewing historical records when he noticed a pattern that everyone else had missed. The timing of the new entity activity coincided with something that had nothing to do with dimensional cycles or dark matter concentrations. "Dr. Hayes," Clark said during the morning briefing, "I think I know what triggered this. 3 months ago, we detected signals from the Magellanic Clouds, radio transmissions that suggested intelligent life. What if the entities aren't just responding to local conditions? What if they're aware of developments in other galaxies?" The implications were staggering. If the entities could detect civilizations across intergalactic distances, then the scope of their intelligence was far greater than anyone had imagined. They weren't just cosmic predators. They were part of some kind of vast network that spanned multiple galaxies. Admiral Parker called an emergency conference of all senior commanders. The meeting was held in a secure facility deep underground, with representatives from every major species participating via encrypted communication links. The news that Parker shared with them changed everything they thought they knew about their situation. "Intelligence analysis suggests that the entities operate as part of a multi-galactic collective," Parker explained. "The small scouts we're seeing may be advanced teams, preparing for something much larger than we've faced before." Chairman Vexara listened to the briefing from the council chambers, his ancient features grave with concern. "What are you suggesting, Admiral? That we're facing another invasion?" Not exactly, Parker replied. We think they're preparing for a migration. The signals from the Magellanic Cloud suggest that whatever civilizations exist, they are facing their own entity crisis. The Scouts may be looking for temporary refuge while their home galaxy undergoes a harvest cycle. The idea that void entities could be refugees from their own cosmic processes was almost too strange to accept, but the evidence was mounting. The Scout entities showed none of the aggressive behavior associated with hunting patterns. They seemed to be looking for empty space where they could exist without conflict. Colonel Sarah Davis commanded the First Contact Team, a specialized unit trained to communicate with non-human intelligences. Her mission was to establish contact with the entity scouts and determine their intentions. It was dangerous work, but essential for understanding what the galaxy might be facing. Remember, we're not dealing with the same entities that tried to harvest our galaxy, Davis briefed her team. These scouts may be as afraid of us as we are of them. Our job is to find out what they want and whether we can coexist. The first attempt at communication took place in an empty system far from any inhabited worlds. Davis's team used modified reality anchors to create a stable communication zone where both humans and entities could interact safely. The results were unlike anything they had expected. The entity scouts responded to the communication attempt immediately, but not with hostility. Instead, they transmitted complex mathematical patterns that human computers recognized as a form of peaceful contact protocol. After hours of careful exchange, a basic understanding began to emerge. The entities were indeed refugees, fleeing from a harvest cycle in their home galaxy that had grown beyond their ability to control. The collective intelligence that governed all entity behavior had become corrupted, turning a natural feeding process into an endless consumption that threatened to devour everything in its path. The Scouts were looking for a place where their people could exist without contributing to the destructive cycle. They're asking for sanctuary, Davis reported to Admiral Parker. Not for invasion, but for protection. They want to exist alongside us without competing for resources. The news sparked heated debate throughout the galaxy. Some species argued that any entity presence was too dangerous to allow. Others pointed out that the Scouts had shown no hostile behavior and might even become allies against the corrupted collective they were fleeing from. Dr. Lisa Grant was brought in to lead the diplomatic negotiations. Her experience with interdimensional phenomena and her understanding of entity psychology made her the obvious choice for such a delicate mission. The talks took place in a specially constructed facility that existed partially outside normal space, allowing both humans and entities to participate comfortably. What you're asking is unprecedented, Grant explained to the entity representatives during one of their sessions. Our species has only recently learned to coexist with the knowledge that you exist. Asking us to share our galaxy with refugee entities requires a level of trust that may take time to develop. The entity response came in the form of mathematical concepts that human computers translated into emotional meaning. The Scouts expressed understanding of human concerns, but also desperation. Their home galaxy was dying, consumed by the corrupted collective that had once maintained cosmic balance. They needed a new home, or their people would face extinction. Captain Tim Brooks, now a senior advisor on entity relations, proposed a solution that satisfied both sides. The galaxy would designate specific regions of empty space as entity sanctuaries, areas where the refugees could exist without interfering with normal matter civilizations. In exchange, the entity refugees would serve as early warning systems against incursions from their corrupted home galaxy. It's a partnership based on mutual need, Brooks explained to the council. They get a safe place to exist, and we get advance warning about threats from outside our galaxy. Both sides benefit from the arrangement. The negotiations took 6 months to complete, but the result was the first treaty between matter-based and energy-based civilizations in galactic history.